Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, entertainment, and give you my thoughts. If you join us live, super happy to have you. If at any point you have any questions or comments about any of the topics I'm going to be covering, feel free to drop them in the live chat. I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on it, see if we can kind of get a conversation started. If you haven't already, please like this live stream. It really, really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people, finding the channel. So if you have found the channel, why not subscribe? We're trying to grow this community as big as we can. If you're watching this after the fact, still super happy to have you. By the time you're watching this, there should be time codes down in the description so you can kind of jump around at your leisure. We stream this show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And same deal as before. If you haven't already, please like this video and do not forget to subscribe. Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past week. Total domestic box office cracked 100 million, 100.5 million for the week, which is a 6% jump. Which is, again, it's always good to see a little bit of growth, but you're not going to see it every week. But over the long term, we're definitely in better shape than we were, however many weeks, like the earlier parts of this year, right? Because now we're in April, and I was like, should I do like an April Fool's episode? And I was like, nah, because I hate April Fool's things as an adult because I forget it's April Fool's, whereas when you're a kid, you're obsessed with the fact that today is April Fool's. But when I'm an adult, I'm just I got other shit to do, so that someone will post a news story and it's fake, and I'll be like, wait, what? So, these are real numbers. Everything you see here is real. So, looking at opening film, so nothing new this week took the number one spot. Snow White held out that first place spot in its second week now. A 41% drop, so again, not awful by any stretch. Again, that's not great, but that's not awful. We have seen worse second week drop-offs. And again, the popcorn meter, right, on Rotten Tomatoes, is low because audiences usually overinflate their feelings about a movie. But the fact it's not review bomb. I think I actually read that Snow White on IMDb has been review bombed, of course, by crazy conservative reactionary people who are like, this movie's woke. So, but I guess we haven't really, I guess Rotten Tomatoes has now taken the steps to kind of try to mitigate review bombing. But again, critics didn't really seem to like it all that much with a 40%. This brings its worldwide total up to a little under 143 million, but again, it was so expensive to make, almost $270 million, that, it is still very much in the red. Now, that being said, every week it's less and less in the red, but, as every week goes by, you're going to keep having drops and drops and drops. So it becomes harder and harder week to week to get closer to breaking even, right? But a lot of new stuff opening this week. We have a Working Man, the Jason Statham action thriller, pretty much exactly what you would expect, and critics didn't really seem to like it. But audiences seem to pretty much enjoy it quite a bit. 89% fell within the projections on the upper end mostly. I projected it to make around 10 to 16. Made about 15.5. So it was near that upper end of things. Worldwide, this is it's made about a little over 32 million, but again, off of a $40 million budget. So it's still very much in the red, but it's in a much better position to make back that budget than something like Snow White is even 2 weeks in, right? The Chosen, these are The Chosen Last Supper, this is only part one. These are episodes of this newest season. 99% popcorn meter. I think that's a lot. I think that's a little bit of self-selection there. Also fell within the projections on the upper end, right? I had projected it to make around 9 to 12.5. Or at least that's what the projections were. I didn't necessarily make the projections for this specific thing for The Chosen, because I was like, it's not really a movie, but it cracked not only the top 10, the top 5. It's at number 3 here. So, but the target was around 10. So again, it's much closer to that upper end. And this is only domestic, and you're gonna see them do another couple episodes this upcoming week, and then the week after they'll do the rest of the season, a couple more episodes. And I would assume that's the entire season, which is a really interesting strategy. I did a video about The Chosen on this channel, and it's definitely an interesting release strategy that they've had, because essentially started as a crowdfunded operation, and it has just become this, it's basically, it's available for free, I believe, But releasing it in theaters, people who really are into it want to see it on the big screen with other people. So I've always felt like they should do, like they, meaning like the entertainment industry, should really do more TV events in theaters. Like imagine the Oscars or the Super Bowl or like the newest Game of Thrones episode. Like imagine that when that show was on week, or I guess now it would be like something like Severance, right? Like imagine getting to watch that in a packed theater and have people react, along with you, right? The Woman in the Yard. This is something, whereas the other movies that we've been talking about have had pretty decent, audience reception. This has not been doing well. It has a 43% from critics, 45% from audiences. But again, fell within the projections on the upper end. It was projected to make around 5 to 10. I put the target around 7. This made about 9.4 for the week. So this is only domestic, right? But again, still in the red, right? And that's always the name of the, the name of the game is, yes, you can make you could be like Snow White and make, almost $150 million worldwide. But if it cost you almost double that to even make the movie, then like your dollar isn't going as far, right? So, the perfect world is when you have a film cheaper that you can really stretch the dollar and then make a bunch of those smaller movies to have some diversification in your portfolio. Like it's just like investment 101. But you're also just going to get a lot more films and a lot more interesting films, right? But this is not doing very well, again, critically. Again, it's just like your very standard, like, modern horror thriller that has, like, this weird social anxiety gimmick. And I'm anticipating a sizable drop. But maybe that might not actually be the case, considering it's not opening very big. So, it can only drop so much, right? And then a film here that's opening that did not only did not reach the upper end of the projections, but actually didn't even meet the bottom, was Death of a Unicorn. This is like a horror comedy from A24, I believe. It was projected to make around 7 to 15. Couldn't even get up to 6, right? Again, the marketing for this, I think I saw like one trailer for it. And, audiences seem to like it okay, right? But like we talked about, like if it's in the 70 range for audiences, they must really not care for it all that much, because again, audiences overinflate how much they liked it to self-rationalize the cost and the time of the movie. Like the 3 hours or wherever long you took away from your life to go see this. But critics didn't really seem to like it all that much at 54%. And again, it's awful ROIs here. It was made for 15, so, we are very much still in the red here for Death of a Unicorn. Looking here at, we still, interestingly, we still have Captain America Brave New World, a movie that kind of came not with a bang but a whimper. Again, critics didn't really like it. Audiences liked it more, but still not super enthusiastic. But it's been holding, I don't even want to say holding well, but it's still here, right? It dropped out. It dropped from 5th to 6th place in its 7th week, though, right? So 7 weeks, still in the top 10 for a film that basically no one seems to really give a shit about. I think is a win, if you're being kind of optimistic about things, right? This brings its worldwide total over 400 million, and this is in the green, right? So not only did it make back that initial budget number, but it doubled its budget. But again, considering that measly percent return, only 127% return, we at Marvel and Disney want it to be 800,000% return, right? So, it's by MCU standards. I'm sure Disney and Marvel are not super, super happy about this. And then also just barely squeaking into the top 10, we have a re-release of Princess Mononoke, I think for its 25th anniversary, because didn't that come out in 97? I'm not sure what the reason for what was for. Let me re-say that. I don't know what the reasoning was for re-releasing this, but it's like a 4K restoration, and of course, critics love it, audiences love it. Made a little over $3 million, but I'd be surprised if this is still, I don't know if it's going to still even be playing in a week, but even if it is, I'd be surprised if it's still in in the top 10. And then looking ahead to this upcoming weekend, we have a Minecraft movie. I've heard this is awful, which makes sense from just the trailer. I'm not sure what, like, I guess based off of the branding, it's a good bet. It's predicted to make around 57 to 75 million. I'm gonna put the target around 66. It's, not a huge opening, but it definitely would be, it would definitely be better than Snow White's opening. And it would, I'm sure it'll make theater owners happy to have a movie that is, kind of bringing in those bigger numbers, especially families. And that's an advantage that a movie like this has, is ultimately when it's a family movie, most likely if the kids are like 7 and there's 2 of them, they're not going to go to the movies alone, so the parents will have to come and buy tickets, so you're going to like double the amount of tickets, that you're going to sell. And then also we have, like I mentioned before, The Chosen Last Supper, Part 2. So this is episodes 3, 4, and 5. It's only projected to make around 3 to 8 million. Again, very small. I'm going to put this around 6. And just to confirm, what did it make? So this last one made over 11 million. Almost 12 million. So it'll be interesting to see, if it's going to be like this lower end, or if it can maybe kind of match where it was before. Oh, wait, hold on. I want to do a quick plug first. Before getting into any other stories, I want to give a quick plug to another YouTube channel I have called Replay Rewind. I just started it. 1,000 video games across 50 years of gaming history. Can I play them all before I die? Well, we're going to find out. It's my opportunity to go through all these classic games. 99% of them I have never played. And kind of see the evolution of the medium. I just did Combat, the Atari 2600 game. I did my playthrough video and breakdown / review. It's been a lot of fun. I just played Space Invaders, so I'm going to have to do that breakdown sometime this week. So it's been a lot of fun. Definitely go check it out. You can find the link in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 1. So Marvel has announced the cast for its upcoming Avengers Doomsday. The next Avengers film. We haven't had one since Avengers Endgame. And which was, by the time this comes out, it'll have been 7 years since Endgame came out. The way they announced the cast was with this massive 328-minute live stream, so that's like 5.5 hours. And what they did was they had this row of these canvas director's chairs, and they essentially they would like hold on one for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then kind of the camera would pan to a new one, and on the back of each one had a cast member's name, right? So they slowly revealed each name as the 5.5 hours progressed, until the very end, when we finally panned over to Robert Downey Jr.'s chair, which of course we already knew he was going to be in this movie, playing a multiversal version of Doctor Doom. But at the very end, he comes out, sits in his chair, then it pans out to show him, and he looks at the camera and kind of does like a little like shushing motion, and then he gets up, and then it ends, right? And this stunt performed pretty well. It had 275 million viewers, and 3.1 million social mentions, which, I guess is really important. So let me just run through this whole list, which is quite long, of the names that were listed. I guess some of these we knew were going to be here. Some of them we presumed would be there. Some of these were genuine surprises, though we'll discuss if they are good surprises or I feel like that's not a good idea. Okay. So the names were Chris Hemsworth, of course, as Thor, Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm, aka the Invisible Woman, Anthony Mackie as the new Captain America, Sebastian Stan as Bucky Barnes, aka Winter Soldier, Letitia Wright as Shuri from Black Panther, Paul Rudd as Scott Lang, of course, Ant-Man. It was funny because he got like a little chair that was like much smaller on the ground. Wyatt Russell as John Walker, the character from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier Disney Plus show. Tenoch Huerta Mejia, I'm so sorry for butchering that. The guy that played Namor from the more recent Black Panther movie. Eben Moss Backrack playing Ben Grimm, aka The Thing, from the Fantastic Four. Simu, or is it Simu or Simu? Simu Liu, of course, is Shang-Chi. Florence Pugh is Yelena Belova, the sister of Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow. This is where things get crazy. Kelsey Grammer as Hank McCoy, a.k.a. Beast, from the Fox X-Men franchise. Louis Pullman, who plays Sentry from the new Thunderbolts movie. I don't even know who that is. Danny Ramirez, who's the new Falcon, who I guess was introduced in the latest Captain America movie, which I did not see. And a lot of people didn't see. Joseph Quinn as Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch from Fantastic Four. David Harbour as the Red Guardian from Black Widow. Winston Duke as M'Baku from the Black Panther movies. Hannah John Kamen as Ava Star / Ghost, who was in the Ant-Man and the Wasp movie. Tom Hiddleston as Loki, of course. Patrick Stewart as Professor X from the Fox X-Men movies. And notably, he's already been introduced into the MCU through the Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness movie when he was on like a multiversal council of different heroes. But don't worry, Patrick Stewart will not be alone. He will be with his best friend Ian McKellen, who is going to be playing Magneto, also from the Fox X-Men movies. Also from the Fox X-Men movies, Alan Cumming, apparently returning as Nightcrawler, from X2 X-Men United, which is the only time he ever played the character, more than 20 years ago. Rebecca Romijn, I always forget how to pronounce her last name, who of course played Mystique in those Fox movies before Jennifer Lawrence played the younger version of her. James Marsden as Cyclops is coming back, as well as Channing Tatum as Gambit, who, famously was going to be Gambit in a movie, and then the movie fell through, so then he got to be in Deadpool and Wolverine. And then, of course, they also revealed that Pedro Pascal would be in this as Reed Richards, a.k.a. Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four. And like I said, it ends with Robert Downey Jr., who, again, we've already known since I think it was like last summer. We've known he was going to be in this. Okay, so that's the list. And of course, the biggest surprises here are the X-Men characters. The decision to include them, clearly nostalgia bait, right? Because notably, I could double check the list, but I don't think there's anybody from the rebooted X-Men cast, like a Michael Fassbender or a James McAvoy or Nicholas Hoult as Beast. Like, we don't have any of those. It's all of the 2000s X-Men, right? As like that's the main focus here. And presumably, if they're including them in this announcement, they're more than just cameos, right? The way that like Patrick Stewart as Professor X in the second Doctor Strange movie, we knew he was going to be in that, but it wasn't heavily advertised, and his name wasn't like being revealed like Patrick Stewart in Doctor Strange, right? So presumably everyone listed here are more than just cameos, unless they are so desperate for attention and relevancy that they're like, we're literally going to tell you the surprise cameos ahead of time. I just feel bad. And I want to talk about this in a larger sense, this nostalgia bait thing, but I also just feel bad because like Stewart and McKellen are old. Like, just let them retire. Like, why are they still playing these characters 25 years, 26 years later? Like, just let them be, especially McKellen. Because, for a podcast that I do, that's what I call a franchise. You can find the link in the description below. We pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment each season. And our very first season was X-Men. But then most recently, we just wrapped up our season, or I think we're about to on this upcoming week. Wrapped up our season on Middle-earth and Lord of the Rings. And notably, Ian McKellen was really distraught and did not enjoy making the Hobbit movies because so much of it was green screen and blue screen where he was just like alone and then would be like composited into scenes. So he talked about like a lot of his scenes, he was just talking to like tennis balls or like a ball that would light up. Like, that's the person I'm supposed to be looking at. And he complained because he was like, when we made the original films in the early 2000s, if Gandalf was on a mountain, I was on a mountain, right? If Gandalf was in a cave, I was in a cave. Like, there was a physical set to interact with. If he thought The Hobbit was too reliant on blue screen, green screen, just wait till you get involved with the MCU, because it's just a whole other animal. But of course, there's a lot of characters missing in action, right? Some prominent MCU characters and actors that were not included here, including Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange, Chris Pratt as Star-Lord, or any of the Guardians of the Galaxy for that matter. Tom Holland as Spider-Man, Elizabeth Olsen as Scarlet Witch, Jeremy Renner as Hawkeye, Mark Ruffalo as Hulk, Tatiana Maslany as She-Hulk, Brie Larson as Captain Marvel, Teyonah Parris as Monica Rambeau, Iman Vellani as Miss Marvel, Evangeline Lilly as Wasp, or Catherine Newton as Stature. I had no idea she had a name. Ant-Man's daughter, right? But the newer actress, Catherine Newton, right? Who was in Ant-Man and Ant-Man Quantumania, whatever the hell the movie was called. Ant-Man the Wasp. Quantumania? I don't even remember. Though, just because they weren't announced doesn't mean they might not be in this, right? So there may be even more reveals down the line. Robert Downey Jr. posted on Instagram after this saying, quote, "That's what you call a deep bench of talent. Actually, it's more like a row, but an extra long one. That must be it, ... right?" End quote. And then Marvel, the official Marvel Instagram account, responded in the comments, quote, "There's always room for more," end quote. So, presumably there's going to be other surprises here. I don't know if there'll be surprises in that we won't know until we're literally sitting in the theater watching the movie, or if they'll do more cast announcements as we get closer. But just based off of this list, it really says a lot about the direction that Marvel is going in, right? Specifically the MCU. Notably, I feel like there's a heavy dose of Infinity Saga characters in ways that makes them feel, that makes it seem like they are insecure about the work they have put out since Endgame. And to some degree, they should be insecure about it, because a lot of the content has been love it, like it or don't like it, love it or hate it. It's just very aimless, right? It just doesn't feel like it's always felt very factory styled. But the content that we've gotten from within this franchise since Endgame, and even before Endgame, but especially since Endgame, has felt just so cookie cutter that even audiences who aren't super attuned to like quality cinematic techniques or what have you, they're starting to kind of catch on that this is just more of the same. And again, this cast plays on that. So, Chris Hemsworth is Thor. Like, can we be done with him? I feel like Doctor Strange and Tom Holland Spider-Man are like some of the more popular characters that we now have post Endgame. And of course, they're nowhere to be found. Now, of course, Tom Holland Spider-Man has his own Spider-Man film that will be coming out, I think, after this movie, but before the Avengers 6. But even still, it just feels like what is this even going to be about, right? And even if we know the plot, I just mean like, okay, but what is it about, like, on a human level, like thematically? Like, what is this really, like, what can I sink my teeth into as a human being, right? The introduction, it's also really frustrating because people were so excited once Disney bought Fox and they got the rights to X-Men, because they were like, we can now finally introduce the X-Men into the MCU. But a lot of people, myself included, were like, how do you introduce them if, like why haven't they come up before, right? I very much thought what they were going to do is that the snap, right, the infamous snap, the blip, as they try to call it within universe, but we all know it's the snap. I thought maybe the way they were going to go is that the radiation of that event creates mutants or something. But it seems like they are not doing it, doing something creative. They are literally just going, we're just going to take all of the X-Men characters from the Fox franchise that people liked and just import them through multiversal explanations and shenanigans, right? Which could be really good, but is kind of lame, right? It just feels like a little they weren't really, they're not really trying to come up with like a creative way to introduce these characters, but it's more just like, all right, here you go. Here's more stuff you like that you've all said you really like. It just really feels like they're playing it safe, right? And this movie, is going to make a shit ton of money, right? I don't think this is going to be an issue of, like, this movie's going to flop. By me saying, like, audiences are starting to catch on. Because just look at Deadpool and Wolverine, which was, like, a good movie. I thought it was good. But the amount of money that movie made, I feel like, for a movie that's essentially just, like, fan service from wall to wall, I think audiences, like, they will have to keep upping the ante, because audiences are, like, if you're not focused on telling really interesting human stories with characters, and this don't have to be like the fucking Godfather, but just like basic things, like something like Spider-Man 2 is an incredible superhero film, but it's also like a really good movie at the same time. And they're not mutually exclusive. So if you're not going to do that, and you're just going to go for spectacle, and not even spectacle like VFX spectacle, but just like, wow, the novelty, like that was the big novelty of the MCU at the start, was like getting to not only see these characters on screen, but then getting to see them interacting with one another, like having this shared universe. But eventually audiences, like, novelties wear off. So you have to keep upping the ante with the novelty. So, like, what is the novelty going to be eventually? Like, you're going to have a Marvel DC crossover with deep fake CGI versions of, like, every possible character and actor that has ever played any of these characters. Like, eventually you're just going to hit a point where you either can't do anything else, or anything else you would do would be dumb, uninteresting, unethical, or all three. Or something else, right? This movie's going to make a shit ton of money, but is it going to be a cultural phenomenon the way the first Avengers was, the way Infinity War and Endgame were? I do not think so. Now, I guess the question, though, is, was this always the plan, right? To make this Avengers 5 and 6 into this massive multiversal? Because they did dub this the multiverse saga, right? Obviously, everything got shuffled around during the shift away from Jonathan Majors Kang. But again, it was always going to be multiversal. This was the multiverse saga. So I guess the question is not, would it have still been about a multiverse, but rather, would the multiverse have been so focused on, let's just use this as an excuse to bring in actors from prior franchises that people want to keep seeing stuff from, so we can have our cake and eat it too. That's what I'm not as sure about. Was it always going to be so fan service-y? I'm not sure. But again, I would love to be proven wrong. Infinity War is like one of my favorite movies ever made. Not just Marvel, not just superheroes. Like, Infinity War is incredible. But I feel like what made that film incredible was not novelty. It was like actually interesting character stuff and filmmaking techniques. So, I'm always cautiously optimistic with these things, but I have been burned before, and I'm sure Marvel will burn me again. Okay, but before going forward, I want to give a quick plug. I already kind of talked about it. Now that's why I call it franchise. The podcast I do with my fiance Viviana, where we pick a film franchise every season, and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This Friday, we're wrapping up our Middle-earth season, doing a big franchise retrospective, which was a lot of fun. So definitely go check that out. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also just find us on YouTube if that's your preferred way to podcast. And you can also just find us in the link down in the description below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 2. So Nintendo has announced a new way, this is really interesting, a new way to share games with friends and family. Digitally, introducing virtual game cards. So these are going to be little tokens, right? Digital, of course, not physical. That will be created when a digital game is purchased on the Nintendo eShop. And it'll be managed from a dedicated screen. So the way this will work is that you'll be able to lend your digital games to members, either members of your Nintendo Switch family account, one game per person for up to 2 weeks. So it's a very specific time period to lend these games. And then you can also lend your virtual game card to other consoles using local communication. So like if we both have a Switch, we can connect our Switches if we're in the same room, and you will kind of transfer the game over to me, and then I will now be able to play it on my device. And an internet connection would be required for ejecting or loading the games, but no connection is required to play the games. And the reason why this is so interesting to me is that this is a major innovation. If not technologically, then at the very least culturally or in terms of business practice, right? Because the big thing about digital purchases that I feel like most consumers don't fully realize is, so digital purchases have always been a consumer's nightmare and a company's wet dream. Because, unlike selling like a physical game disc, there's no manufacturing costs. They're able to sell directly to the consumers. Nintendo has it on the eShop, as opposed to going to GameStop or Walmart or whatever it is. And what makes digital purchases so enticing for companies and what makes it suck for consumers is it's nearly impossible to lend your digital purchase to someone else. The way I can let someone borrow a DVD or a book or a video game if I have it physically. And that's great because then, people will have to buy the game instead of just borrowing it from someone for free. And to that same point, there's no secondary market for digital copies. The way, you can bring your box of physical PS2 games to a garage sale or a flea market and sell them, or go to GameStop and trade them in, or you could buy stuff online on eBay, right? There's no real way to sell a digital purchase, right? And purchase, really, we should call it something else, because technically, you do not own your digital purchases in the way owning really means, right? Because if I buy a book, I have that book now. Like, the company can't come at any point and go, like, Barnes & Noble can't come to me and go, actually, we're taking this book back now for XYZ reason. Whereas with digital purchases, technically in the fine print, all you're buying is the access or the license to digitally access this content. Because that's the big thing with streaming is that people are yearning for purchasing things, because with streaming, if things are getting taken off different services, you never have any reliability with what's going to be available. But the solution is buying things physically, because digital purchases, it's not rental, it's not streaming subscription. If you buy a movie on Apple TV, technically, especially, and this often happens because of rights, you do not necessarily own that. You don't get an MP4 file, right? You do not get a file, something you can actually retain. So that's been a big pain in the ass with this digital landscape when it comes to buying entertainment commodities or units, right? So something like this, while not perfect and does not completely address what all the things I was just saying, it at least it's a step in the right direction. And it's interesting because it's a very pro-consumer move that is very rare for Nintendo. At least more, I was going to say more modern Nintendo, but Nintendo has this weird split personality thing where the creative side is so creative and really reverent of its product, and Nintendo doesn't they're not churning out slop all the time. They might only release a couple games a year directly by Nintendo, but they're gonna be the best games of the year, if not the console generation, if not of all time, right? Not always, of course, but it's because they put so much care. It's so precious, right? The business side of Nintendo are ruthless, money-grubbing bastards who will find every opportunity to nickel and dime you. So to see them implement something like this, to see any company do this is really great to see, but especially from Nintendo, was a very pleasant surprise. And I feel like everything I'm talking about is so important for all of media, again, like music and film and books and games, but this is so important for gaming specifically because it's such a big time commitment, most games, where, you know, being able to borrow from a friend or buy a cheap used copy from GameStop was a great way to try out a game. You know, I very fondly remember going into GameStop and trying different games, and a lot of times they were bad, right? That's why they were traded in and were cheap, but it was a great opportunity to be surprised, right? And to find a hidden gem, right? Or at least just test the waters and then go buy it, right? It's like, oh, this is good enough, like I want to have this game so I can play it, you know, without any restrictions, right? So this is really cool to see. I've read a lot of people saying that, you know, probably a big reason why they're doing this is to simplify the transition of your games library from your Switch to now the Switch 2. And also there's been like a lack of clarity about the exact rules. Like, okay, is it always a 2-week period, or can you indefinitely lend out a game to a friend if you do it through a local connection? Of course, if you lend out your game to anybody, like, you won't be able to play it. Like, the idea is that it becomes almost like an NFT, right? Where it's like a you know, it becomes scarce, right? So there's been like a lack of clarity on like how exactly this is going to work, but unless I completely have misunderstood how this is going to work, I think this is a really interesting thing for Nintendo to do, specifically because it's Nintendo. And I'm excited to see how this is actually implemented and how it kind of manifests for players and consumers. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 3. So, a Scooby-Doo, I'm sorry, I fucking love saying Scooby-Doo. It's just like, I love the ooh and the e. It's just so great. And now I start to feel like Kamala Harris when she's like, I just love Venn diagrams. I love those 2 circles and where they go. But anyway, a Scooby-Doo live action series is heading to Netflix. I got a quote here from the vice president of scripted series at Netflix, Peter Friedlander. Hey, that's a good first name. Saying, quote, Mystery Inc. is back in business. We're excited to bring Scooby-Doo to TV as a live-action series for the first time. The beloved franchise has had an impact on pop culture that is undeniable. It's rich with universal themes of this is like laying it on a little thick. It's rich with universal themes of friendships that generations of fans have long embraced. Together with creative powerhouses Berlanti Productions and Midnight Radio, which are like the companies that are actually going to be making this. We're committed to delighting longtime fans and opening up a world of groovy adventures for a new era of meddling kids, end quote. So, for any of my younger audience who are like, what's Scooby-Doo? I'm sorry. I can't even, like, pretend to be, like, the annoyed, like, 20, 30-something-year-old who's like, oh, kids these days, they don't even know what insert thing is. But in case you are the uninitiated, of course, Scooby-Doo, maybe you're familiar with Scooby-Doo, but you don't know about the origins of Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo Zero. What's the ground zero of Scooby? So, of course, this character and this cast of characters, right, originated in the 1969 show Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Annoyingly, though, it has an exclamation point, not a question mark. That's kind of annoying. It should be Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Question mark. This was created by Hanna-Barbera, of course, of, you know, Tom and Jerry and Yogi Bear and all of those, that whole kind of lineup of characters. And this was a Saturday morning cartoon for CBS. And it has had so many reboots, reimaginings, revitalizations. I think I did a count. There's been like 14 different shows, like dozens of animated movies, a couple live action movies as well. So 2 theatrical films, right? That was like from my childhood, as well as 2 live action television films and then 1 direct to video film. And that's just live action. Again, there's something like 30 or 40 animated films, whether it's theatrical or direct to video or things like that. The Hanna-Barbera kind of changed hands in terms of who owned and controlled the company between 1969 and now. But most notably, it was acquired by Turner Entertainment in 1991. And then in 1996, Turner fell into the hands of Warner Brothers. So by transitive property, now Scooby-Doo is within the Warner's umbrella, and that's where it's been more or less ever since. The thing about Scooby-Doo is that, it's an iconic brand, no doubt about it. Now, do I think it's, quote, rich with universal themes of friendship that generations of fans have long embraced? I think it might be laying it on a little thick. But it's an iconic brand but it's struggled to maintain relevance. Like, it's like a bell curve, right? Where if you have like a lot of different shows or content within your franchise, that's really good. But at a certain point, it starts to become an indicator that the franchise is struggling, right? If you have 14 different shows over 50 years, it probably means they didn't last very long. And if you look at this list, like most of them only go on for like a season or two, right? It's been a very hard nut to crack for exploitative, greedy media executives who are like, we own this thing, how can we make money off of it? So the new show, so here's like a little like a synopsis that was released about, or kind of like a premise for the show. Quote, during their final summer at camp, old friends Shaggy and Daphne, weird that you usually don't see them paired up. Old friends Shaggy and Daphne get embroiled in a haunting mystery surrounding a lonely lost Great Dane puppy that may have been witness to a supernatural murder. Together with the pragmatic and scientific townie Velma and the strange but ever so handsome new kid Freddy, they set out to solve the case that is pulling each of them into a creepy nightmare that threatens to expose all of their secrets. End quote. What secret? Aren't they children? What secrets do they have? I don't know. But so a lot of people have been joking that like this is basically the Riverdale-ification of Scooby-Doo, right? And I'm not completely against that, right? Because I actually quite like Riverdale. I think it's a guilty pleasure. I think depending on what era of the show you're watching, it's like kind of self-aware that it's stupid, and they like lean into it. And in a lot of ways, they kind of made the Archie comics into Scooby-Doo. In that like it becomes about like these murder mysteries and supernatural elements, like and so it's not preposterous to kind of maybe for an executive to go, well, can we kind of try that approach with something like Scooby-Doo? So I'm not completely against it. But what makes it different than the Archie comics is the fact that there's a talking dog. That kind of makes things a little complicated, right? Are you going to do it where he's not a talking dog? Are you going to do it that he's a real dog, or is it CGI? And not just CGI, because, I mean, it's probably going to be CGI just because it's cheaper now to just do a CGI animal, so you don't have to worry about finding a real animal and paying all the trainer's costs and things like that. But I guess the question is, will they be rendered realistically as a dog, or will it be, obviously with it will be better quality, but it will be more like the live action movies from my childhood where it's like he doesn't look like a real dog. Like he looks like a cartoony dog. So I'm not sure if this approach is really going to work. And ultimately I also think live action is a mistake. I always feel like Scooby-Doo is best suited for animation. Not necessarily because it's wacky, because again, you can do anything now because of computer-generated effects. You can do anything in live action. But rather, I feel like it works really well because the characters, their characterizations are cartoony. So it's not that you can't do it in live action, but that was the problem with the live action, with the James Gunn written. I don't know if he wrote the second one, because he didn't direct the first one, but he definitely wrote the first one. The problem with those is that they are trying to have their cake and eat it too. That it wants to be both a parody and satire of Scooby-Doo, and yet at the same time be like a reverent, not even homage, but like a reverent new entry into the franchise. And it's not that you can't do both, but it's a very very thin line, very fine line to walk. That it's a fine line for a reason, because it's hard to accomplish. And it's also interesting. It's not for Max, which of course is it's Warner Brother Discovery's own streaming service. But we are in an era now in this media landscape where, companies have decided, shit, we had a really good thing going where we would just make a bunch of content and license it out to streaming dedicated companies like Netflix or Amazon Prime. We should just go back to doing that. Because it's a lot easier, and we have a better rate of return, or a more consistent rate of return. So they decided to pawn it off to Netflix, who I'm sure are happy to be the home of another popular brand. I think of something like Wednesday, the Jenna Ortega-led Addams Family kind of a reimagining. And I haven't watched it, but I heard that it was decent, and I think it was popular, right? So, Netflix also did the live action Last Airbender show. So they are kind of in this period right now where they are more than happy to be the home of these popular brands that are owned by other companies, right? But at the end of the day, this is really just an attempt to keep the brand alive. And it's, I hate to say it, but maybe Scooby-Doo, the franchise, not the dog, maybe Scooby-Doo just needs to die. And that's okay. Some properties, some franchises should probably just fade away, right? Whether it's because the original magic isn't there because of a very specific creative team that has either moved on from the project or have since passed away, because we're talking about a franchise that was introduced over 50 years ago. And frankly, it has struggled since the very beginning to be a successful franchise. So maybe, the show can be really good, or the property can be really good. I have found that it's best when it kind of has a spooky but lighthearted, Halloween TV special vibe. I feel like that's always been where it's been best. But, it may have never been that great of an IP anyway. And I think something that a lot of companies don't understand, because they're so numbers focused, is nostalgia does not equal interest. How many properties have you seen resurrected for the legacy sequel or the reboot or whatever it is, because a certain group got very nostalgic for that original thing. So the studios went, oh my god, people are interested, we have to strike while the iron's hot and make something new. And just because they're nostalgic for this other thing doesn't mean that they are going to go spend their money to go see the new thing. Because nostalgia is, by definition, longing for something that does not exist and cannot exist anymore. Right? Because if it can exist, then you wouldn't be nostalgic for it, right? So, you could try your best to recreate it, but at a certain point, I think it's okay if we just let some of these franchises move on. And because again, I don't think Scooby-Doo is just strong enough of a. It's iconic, it's recognizable, but does it really get people excited? I don't think so. Okay, so just want to give another plug. I have another YouTube channel called Peter Squared, where I also cover topics related to film, media, entertainment, but in a more structured video essay format. The video I have up right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, taking a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, using these cartoon versions of myself. It was a lot of fun to make. Hopefully it's a lot of fun to watch. Definitely go watch it, comment, let me know why you disagree with everything I said. You can find the link in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay, let's talk about story number 4. So Hamdan, I really apologize for most likely mispronouncing this name. Hamdan Bilal, who is one of the co-directors of the recent Oscar-winning documentary No Other Land, was attacked and briefly went missing in the West Bank, in his home village of Susya. And we found out about this from the co-director, one of the co-directors of the, I think there was like 4 directors of that doc. One of the co-directors, Yuval Abraham, who's an Israeli, filmmaker. I think he's a journalist, perhaps. He posted on X saying, "quote." Well, actually, I'm not sure if it's. I don't want to misgender Yuval. I could be wrong. Oh no, Yuval is the guy who spoke at the Oscars. Okay, so anyway, so here's what Yuval said on X. Quote, "A group of settlers just lynched Hamdan Bilal, co-director of our film No Other Land. They beat him and he has injuries in his head and stomach, bleeding. Soldiers invaded the ambulance he called and took him. No sign of him since." End quote. So I guess what had ended up happening was the villagers had asked an Israeli settler to leave, who just wanted to like settle on their land. In response, dozens of men, some of them masked, some of them carrying weapons, returned to terrorize the village by attacking homes, stealing security cameras, battering water tanks. And Bilal was there, and he had been guarding his home when he was attacked and then taken by Israeli soldiers. He later then said, quote, because spoiler alert, he was later released. He said, quote, "They threw me to the ground and the settlers started hitting me on the head. Then a soldier also began beating me. With the butt of his rifle, he struck me on the head. After that, he fired his weapon in the air. I don't understand Hebrew, but I gather that he said the next rifle shot would hit me. In that moment, I thought I was going to die." End quote. The AP reported activists from the Center for Jewish Nonviolence saw the attack as well, saying, quote, "A group of 10 to 20 masked settlers attacked him and other Jewish activists with stones and sticks and smashed their car windows and slashed their tires." End quote. Though thankfully, Abraham later confirmed Bilal's release, saying, quote, "After being handcuffed all night and beaten in a military base, Hamdan Bilal is now free and is about to go home to his family." End quote. So I was like, okay, how do we talk about this story? So I think the only sensible thing to do is to undergo the very simple and straightforward task of unpacking the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So this is a Spark Notes version of this. Highly recommend, and I think it's your duty to go learn more about what goes on in the world and the conflicts in the world, but especially this one, because this is such a crucible for, or microcosm for so many things going on. So, of course, this area of the world, Palestine, Israel, was the historical homeland of the Jews, right? For a lot of ancient history, before the Roman Empire destroyed Jerusalem and the Second Temple in the 1st century when they tried rebelling against them, which led to a massive Jewish diaspora, right? And that's how we end up with a lot of Jewish people in Eastern Europe, especially, right? The area had been trading between empires for centuries, and it was no different after the destruction of Jerusalem, so eventually ends up in the hands of the Ottoman Empire. But once the Ottoman Empire essentially dissolves after being defeated in World War I, the administration of this specific territory fell to the British Empire. It was deemed the Palestinian Mandate, the idea being that England, the United Kingdom would administer this region until it was ready for self-determination and home rule and independence, right? Prior to this, there was obviously tensions, but it was more or less a peaceful coexistence of different religious groups of Arab Muslims and Jews, with some Arab Christians thrown in there. But really, it was the Muslims and the Jewish people. But the religious tensions really started to grow once it fell under the British rule, between the tensions between the Arab Muslims and the Jews, and Zionism as a political, I guess, political or even religious philosophy, which had developed in Europe in the 19th century, really started to grow in adoption and acceptance. Essentially, the most charitable way I could describe Zionism is essentially the idea that the Jews not only deserve but require a Jewish state in the Holy Land, for various reasons. The big one that is used today is for the safety of the Jewish people. Not all Zionists had that view. Some Zionists wanted it because the Jews it was very nationalistic, like we are the best people, we should have our own country and run the country as we see fit. Some Zionists were very explicitly colonialist, in their ambitions. But it was not a monolith, right? But that's kind of a breakdown of Zionism, the idea that a Jewish state must exist in this region, in the Holy Land. And support for such a state grew until you get to, following the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust, where, around 6 million Jews were slaughtered by the German Nazis. You really see this cresting of support, which leads to the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. Because England at this point is basically breaking up its empire, and now Palestine's up for grabs. So you basically have not even really a civil war, right? Because what ends up happening is Egypt and Syria and Transjordan and Iraq invade to prevent a Jewish state from taking place. Part of it perhaps being anti-Semitism, other part, one part anti-Semitism, one part wanting to thwart European colonialism in the garb of a Jewish state. But for whatever reasons you want to ascribe, this war ultimately led to over 700,000 Palestinians fleeing or being actively exiled and forcibly removed from their homes by Zionist militias and the Israeli military. And in the Palestinian community, this event is called the Nakba, or catastrophe, right, is what that word means. Again, the forcible displacement of this people. After the events of this war, Jordan annexes the West Bank, named for its position to the Jordan River. And then Egypt occupies the Gaza Strip. But over the course of the 20th century, Israel starts to take back some of that, right? So I think it was the 6 Days War in 1967 that they take back the West Bank and Gaza Strip and as well as the East Jerusalem, which of course is important not only to the Jewish people, but also to the Muslim world, right? And even to this day, you have issues of Israeli settlers either sanctioned by the government or going rogue and settling areas that are very clearly defined by, international order as Palestinian land. The government either actively sanctioning this or turning a blind eye, because the more land that kind of is within Israel's sphere, the better, right? So the situation today for the Palestinians is just abysmal. Most Palestinians live under military rule and they cannot vote in elections. Territory is divided up by checkpoints and isolated by blockades. Excessive military force is used against dissidents and protesters in these territories. And Israeli policies limit Palestinian access to things like land and water, as well as more abstract things like economic opportunities. All right, so we've set the table, right? So of course, this is all related to that documentary I mentioned, No Other Land, which won Best Documentary Feature a couple weeks ago, about a month ago, at the Academy Awards. Here's the little blurb on Letterboxd to just give you a sense of what the documentary is specifically about. Quote, this film made by a Palestinian-Israeli collective shows the destruction of the occupied West Bank's Masafar Yatta by Israeli soldiers in the alliance which develops between the Palestinian activist Basel and Israeli journalist Yuval. End quote. And again, like I said, it won Best Documentary Feature at this year's Oscars. And I got a quote here from the co-director, Basel Adra, during the acceptance speech, saying, quote, we call on the world to take serious actions to stop the injustice and to stop the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people. About 2 months ago, I became a father, and my hope to my daughter that she will not have to live the same life I'm living now. No Other Land reflects the harsh reality that we have been enduring for decades and still resist, end quote. So this attack on Bilal, was this a coincidence? Probably not, right? It'd be pretty on brand for Israeli settlers and then the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, or whatever that acronym specifically stands for. Because again, it's always, terrorists were doing something. And that was the statement they put out, that, they started throwing rocks and then the soldiers just had to defend themselves that seems to be more or less disproven by actual accounts by people on the ground there. And also, we don't have to wonder if this was a coincidence, because Bilal says, or I guess he claims, that he heard his abductor say, quote, this is the Oscar-winning filmmaker, end quote. So, it seems to have been very intentionally targeted, that, Israel does not like the fact that this documentary not only exists, but won Best Documentary Feature at the Oscars in the United States, which is its biggest ally and supporter. So maybe this was, again, not necessarily targeted, like the secret meeting where we're gonna go do this specifically, but, you know, the general, we know he's here. Let's just kind of make things a little more unpleasant. So, but then another story emerges here, and that is the response by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. So they are kind of silent for a bit. They're originally just silent, but they're criticized by Yuval Abraham. Again, this is really important that he is an Israeli journalist, speaking up and out for the Palestinians, right? Saying, quote, sadly, the U.S. Academy, which awarded us an Oscar 3 weeks ago, declined to publicly support Hamdan Bilal while he was beaten and tortured by Israeli soldiers and settlers, end quote. So the Academy put out this letter to its membership. And I won't read the whole thing, but I'll just read this one little blurb here. Quote, we fundamentally believe that film has the power to enlighten global audiences and highlight different perspectives. And we encourage our members to use their art to do so. The Academy condemns harming or suppressing artists for their work or their viewpoints, end quote. Notably, nowhere in this letter is there any explicit mention of Bilal or the attack by Israeli settlers and soldiers. And people were not happy by this very lukewarm, passive, statement. Especially, and it wasn't in the blurb I read, but there was, there's this kind of both sidesing of like, oh, well, like, there's going to be a lot of different views on things like this. And a lot of people were like, this man was attacked. And it was very clearly politically motivated. How can we look at this from all sides? Like, that's just fundamentally wrong. I got a quote here from A.J. Schnack, who's a documentarian and a member of the documentary branch of the Academy, saying, quote, this is a long blurb here, quote, it's hard for me to adequately express my deep disappointment and anger at the profoundly bad statement that was just sent to Academy members in your name. I am shocked and angry that you are now letting us, your members, know that you view the abduction and beating of a recent honoree as something that members will have, quote, many unique viewpoints of, end quote. With respect, it's a truly heinous suggestion. Your statement made clear that the Academy will not raise their voice if something like this happens to an Academy member in the future, whether by a government at home or abroad. In the current climate, we can't have this important organization kowtow and remain silent. This cannot be the way forward if the Academy truly cares about artistic freedoms and our rights as filmmakers, end quote. And I think it was like hundreds of Academy members wrote an open letter again, criticizing the Academy, saying, quote, it is indefensible for an organization to recognize a film with an award in the first week of March and then fail to defend its filmmakers just a few weeks later. Of course, the Academy, doing damage control, put out another statement apologizing for not naming Bilal by name, saying, quote, on Wednesday, we sent a letter in response to reports of violence against Oscar winner Hamdan Bilal, director of No Other Land, connected to his artistic expression. We regret that we failed to directly acknowledge Mr. Bilal in the film by name. We sincerely apologize to Mr. Bilal and all artists who felt unsupported by our previous statement and want to make it clear that the Academy condemns violence of this kind anywhere in the world. Condones, that's a Freudian slip there. We abhor the suppression of free speech under any circumstances, end quote. So this is a really interesting moment because Hollywood historically has been very pro-Israel. But can this change? I guess is the question. Where do we go from here? I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that the state of Israel is perpetrating, at best, indiscriminate violence and collective punishment, and at worst, ethnic cleansing. And I think more and more people are coming around to this idea that, at the very least, Israel should not be, if we've learned anything over the past 50 or 100 years is that we should not necessarily always trust the American government. So just because the American government is like, this is a good friend and ally of ours, doesn't really mean much. Doesn't mean that it's always the opposite of what America's saying, but you always have to take a closer look at things. And, look at something like South Africa, which people, it's almost become a cliche to compare Israel to South Africa with its apartheid. But eventually, South Africa was pressured into changing. And that was a multi-step process that involved civil unrest, sometimes boiling over into violence. That involved cultural pressure from forces within the country as well as outside of the country, particularly from the United States and especially the artistic community. You know, there was the boycott in the 70s. You know, could something similar happen here? And I think it's the work of filmmakers like Bilal and Yuval Abraham and the other directors and producers of this film, because I feel like just most people just don't, even most normal people don't think about this, and they're not aware of this. Most people are not staunchly pro-Israel or pro-anything. They just don't know and therefore don't care. So, you know, it's the work of filmmakers like this to, you know, as they say in this open, you know, this open letter said, in this current climate, who was it? AJ Schnack said in the current climate, i.e., America itself is slowly fading into perhaps a pseudo-fascist state. You know, it's going to be really important for filmmakers and other artists to show people the truth, the capital T truth, and then let them make up their minds. But we can't really say people have informed opinions if they don't really have all the information and all the facts. So very distressing to see, but I'm really glad that I mean, that makes it sound I'm kind of underselling it. I'm very, very happy that he, you know, was released and he seems to be recovering. Because it was kind of scary there for a minute when it just was, he had been disappeared, right? He did not disappear. He had been disappeared, right? Which of course is a classic term, you know, referring to when the government snatches political dissidents and, you know, they just, no one ever sees them or hears from them again. Okay, let me grab another quick drink here. Okay, let's talk about story number 5. Disgraced producer Scott Rudin is mounting a Broadway comeback. He is developing a handful of productions, including a production of Little Bear Ridge Road, starring Laurie Metcalf. Also producing a play Montauk, also with Metcalf. And then a revival of Death of a Salesman, also with Metcalf. I don't know what the Metcalf thing is, or Laurie Metcalf thing is, but starring Nathan Lane, right, in the lead role. Rudin put, you know, in a long interview with the New York Times said, quote, "I'm going to try to come back and make some more good work, and people will feel how they feel. And if some people are really angry about it, they'll have the right to be angry about it. I own what I did. I feel proud of the work overall and badly about the cost of it to some people who worked on it," end quote. So you might be wondering, who the hell is Scott Rudin? So if you're not like ensconced in the film entertainment world, you probably have no idea who this guy is, who I'm even talking about. Scott Rudin is, I really should say was, but is a prolific and wildly successful film and theater producer. And I would like to list just a couple of his producing credits. For film, and this is including but not limited to, this is maybe like a quarter of everything. I just tried to pick out the most recognizable names here. He is produced in terms of the film world, including but not limited to The Addams Family, Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit, and he also, I think, executive produced the first one, Clueless, The Truman Show, Sleepy Hollow, Zoolander, The Royal Tenenbaums, School of Rock, Team America World Police, The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, No Country for Old Men, Doubt, Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Social Network, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Moonrise Kingdom, The Grand Budapest Hotel, Lady Bird, and Uncut Gems. What a streak! And also in theater, I don't know as much about his work in theater, but notably he produced the revival of Fences with Denzel Washington. You know, he produced a little-known music, maybe you've heard of it, called The Book of Mormon. He also produced the revival of Hello, Dolly with Bette Midler. And right before COVID, he produced the Aaron Sorkin written adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird for Broadway. Though the thing about Scott Rudin, you might be saying, well, what's the deal? What's the problem with Scott Rudin? This is an incredible filmmaker, not filmmaker, but producer, and you know, he really has his finger on the pulse and just works with the best people and makes the best stuff. And that's true. But he is, and I'm very much using this present tense, despite what he wants us to think, he is notoriously hot-tempered. He is the quintessential awful, narcissistic, verbally abusive, sometimes even physically abusive Hollywood executive. That I believe the movie The Player, one of the characters in that is partially based off of Scott Rudin. Again, throwing items at employees, verbal abuse, apparently an instance of smashing a computer monitor on the hand of an assistant. And supposedly he even led one assistant who was more or less mentally healthy, but working for Scott Rudin as an assistant for like a year led to intense PTSD and depression and eventually suicide. And I can speak to the veracity of Scott Rudin's hot temper because I know from experience, because I was an intern there at Scott Rudin Productions from November 2019 to March 2020. The NYU Film School to intern at Scott Rudin Productions pipeline was very, very strong because there was always staff turnover. People were always coming and going, either quitting because it sucks or getting fired for something really dumb and stupid that did not matter at all. So I had just graduated in May of 2019. So I was looking for a job in the industry. And a buddy of mine was like, oh, do you want to work here? And I was like, sure. And I was like, wow, Scott Rudin. He's produced a lot of really cool stuff. I never saw any physical violence, but he was always angry. All the time. Just always in a bad mood. Like, no matter, you could say, I'm going to give you $1 million, and he would still be pissed off. He was just an angry, unhappy, little worm of a man. And I almost have more pity for him. And I don't like doing videos like this where I'm just like shitting and bagging on someone. But he's just a deeply unhappy man. And I really do hope his turn to the good side, as he kind of, as he's trying to claim, I hope it's genuine. I really just do not believe it. And I'll take this opportunity to tell a funny story. So again, I was very good at making myself scarce. Like, I was very good at hiding if he was in the office or if he was running around asking people to do stuff. I always conveniently found myself in the back room organizing, shelves of that was one cool thing. He had a giant shelves of all these DVDs because, again, think about Scott Rudin. He was a hard worker. Like, he wasn't an asshole and then was just like riding on other people's successes. The guy probably worked like 70 hours a week. And a insatiable hunger for content, like reading scripts and watching movies. And one of the things we would do is almost like culture tracking, where we would prepare like this printed out folder of like interesting interviews with up and coming filmmakers or actors or whatever, so that he can kind of keep his finger on the pulse of like who's up and coming, who could potentially be good for different projects. Like, the guy was insane in a good way and a bad way. And I'll tell a funny story though. Again, like, the only real time I had to really interact with him was, most of the time the interns were scheduled. It was like like rolling starts to shift. So like basically a third of the interns would start at 6 a.m., a third would start at 8 a.m., and then a third would start at 10, and then they would, leave at 4 p.m., 6 p.m., 8 p.m., whatever it was, right? But one morning he had a really early meeting, so he needed interns to come in at 5. And I ended up being assigned to that. So I had to go into his office at 5 in the morning. It was me and one other intern and Scott Rudin. And he needed stuff printed out for this meeting, and of course the printer shits the bed and isn't working. So you have me, this other intern from Buffalo, and Scott Rudin trying to figure out how to fix the printer, but not like in this fun, like, oh, the boss is helping us. No, like him getting pissed off at us because the printer wasn't working. And it was just so traumatic. And I should say traumatic. It was dramatic. It was just very funny. So when people came in, I went, I'm going to take a big anxiety shit or something, because I'm like, I was really only here for an hour, and I'm like so wound up. Another time I had to get him a miso salad from Sweet Green. But then I go, he didn't want any, like, lettuce or any kind of leafy green. But then I go and they're like, well, he needs a leafy, your salad, you need a leafy green base. So I was like, I called another intern and I was like, well, what do we give him? And they were like, oh, just get him kale or something. So we get him kale and I bring him the salad and I put it down in front. We plate it, right? If you don't know what plating, it just means you put it on a plate so he's not eating out of a to-go container or whatever. So we put it on a plate for him. We bring it into his meeting. And in the meeting, he's like, what the fuck is this? And I was like, it's your miso salad. He's like, I said no lettuce. And I said, that's kale. It's not lettuce. He was like, why is there fucking kale? And I was like, well, because they insisted on a leafy green base. And he was like, just get the fuck out of here. So my interactions were not, again, violent or traumatic, but they were always just like this deeply unhappy man. And again, it wasn't the turnover wasn't just with the interns. The assistants always swapping out. I was only there from November to March. And it was actually let go like a week, like the week that COVID really took off in the United States, or like the panic around it, because I couldn't work weekends because I had another job. And the office manager was like, well, we need people who can work on weekends. And I was like, well, the last office manager said it was fine. And she was like, well, it's not anymore. So we're letting you go. And then a couple days later, everything shut down. So I was like, yeah, I'm not really that upset about it. Speaking of office managers, from November to March, there were 3 different office managers. Like, that's like a high level person, right? And that's the thing. Most of the staff were post-college graduate, like recent college graduates. Like, most of the staff were just interns. And then there would maybe be like 12 interns, 3 or 4 assistants, 2 other high-level people, and then Scott Rudin. But the thing that really brought him down was there was a big expose on all of this behavior. And the more unsettling stuff from Hollywood Reporter back in 2021. And that more or less he was canceled. He was officially canceled. More or less ended his career. Now, Rudin seems to be doing an apology tour to get back, I guess, try to kind of get back into the industry. And I have some big quotes here from this interview he did with New York Times recently. But I think this is where this image to my left is from. It's so annoying. Like, bro, you literally drove someone to suicide. You're posing in a nice sweater. Like, you're not a fucking Abercrombie model for AARP or some shit. Anyway, here's what he said in this interview. One of these things. He said, quote, I have a lot more self-control than I had 4 years ago. Well, easier said than demonstrated. I learned I don't matter that much, and I think that's very healthy. I don't want to let anybody down. What the fuck are you talking about? Not just myself, my husband, my family, and collaborators. What happened in 2021, was in some basic way inevitable. Very little was said that hadn't been said many times. So I always frankly felt that once the culture started to change, one day it was going to change for me, end quote. That's really damning. So you were aware that this was awful. And you were basically just like, I knew it would be an inevitable that it would catch up with me. So then why were you doing it? Going on, he says, quote, a lot of what was said was true. Some of what was said wasn't true, but I didn't feel there was any point in responding to all of it because what's the point of parsing bad behavior? It was bad behavior. I own it. I don't think I was ever really in the dark about why I was rough on people. I knew why I was rough on people. For a long time, it seemed like a price I could live with. I wasn't really thinking about what price other people could live with because producing at the level of volume that I was requires a level of narcissism. If you don't inherently believe you're doing better than other people, why are you doing it? There are better ways to make a living, end quote. To that I say, fuck you. Because, I guess, and that's the argument people always say, is like, oh, he's an asshole, but, he's such a genius. And, that's the price for his genius. I guess so. But the way he's framing it is almost like, I'm not an asshole, but I was playing an asshole in order to get shit done. Do you have to be an asshole when an intern brings you your miso salad and there's kale in it? How does that accomplish your genius? That's such bullshit. It's just because you're a deeply angry, unhappy person. And you need help. And supposedly he did go to a lot of therapy. So again, I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt. If he has truly gone through the personal work to actually try to change and grow, great. But I don't buy any of this. Again, if you were really sorry for what you did, based off what we know about what he has done, if you were really sorry, Scott, you would be ashamed to even walk out your door, let alone try to mount a comeback. So you even trying to get back in the game demonstrates to me that you are not truly contrite. You're more sorry that you were now called out and canceled for it. And speaking of canceling, cancel culture doesn't exist. Everyone who's like, oh my God, cancel culture, it's a witch hunt. So many canceled people, quote unquote, are making comebacks. And you know, the thing about people like Scott Rudin, is that awful people, I'm not trying to make, only God can judge, but people that do awful things, maybe that's a more charitable way to describe it. People that do awful things survive and thrive off the silence and complicity of others, right? So after this big expose happened, Aaron Sorkin, who of course had worked with Scott a bunch of times on stuff, was asked about how he felt about Rudin being fired from the To Kill a Mockingbird Broadway production, saying, quote, I think Scott got what he deserves, end quote. So, Aaron, where were you before? You're only saying this now because it's, quote unquote, safe to say this now. Or rather, there won't be any repercussions for you saying this now. But if you were working so closely with Scott for so many years, you either saw or at least knew about the way he treats people. So, did it not matter then? Or are you saying you're so, that's people always go, I had no idea. If you're that close or working that closely with someone for so long, you have an inkling. People talking about Harvey Weinstein or talking about Diddy. And very important to note that there seem to be no sexual indiscretions here or abuses of power in that, you making someone feel really uncomfortable in that kind of way. But he's just doing these awful things and acting this awful, reprehensible, unjustifiable way. Where were you, Aaron Sorkin? Did you use your power and influence and any of your not political will, but social cachet to improve the lives of the people that he was, in some cases destroying? Where were you, Aaron Sorkin? And this is a really important thing about cultures like this, or not cultures like this, just macro culture, our culture. Fearing retribution is one thing. If you are one of these women assaulted by Harvey Weinstein, and you're afraid of being blacklisted in the industry or whatever, and your livelihood is going to be in jeopardy, that's one thing. But fearing retribution is not the same thing as fearing losing out on benefits that you gain from being silent or complicit in someone else's bad behavior. That's two totally different things. Because in Aaron Sorkin's case, he's like, well, I'm not going to make as much money if I call this guy out, so I'm not going to do it. That's very different than fearing retribution. So, again, I want to be a good Catholic and good Christian. I want to believe in the redemptive power of grace. But, I just don't believe. I just don't believe him. I don't believe he has changed. And again, Scott Rudin's such a great case because he's not famous, at least to normal people. So he's able to get away with a lot more. And I think as a industry and as a culture and society, we need to hold each other to a higher standard of just basic kindness and decency. And people like Scott are the exact opposite of that. So if he really has changed, I would be more than happy to be the first one to recant everything I'm saying. But again, like I said, if he was truly sorry for all the things that he has done, he would be embarrassed to even be seen in public, frankly. All right, well, on that note, I just want to give that's the end of the show. Just want to give one last plug to Cinnamon Q, so it's not just a YouTube channel. Started as and still is a Substack newsletter where we post new reviews for movies coming out. Primarily right now, we have contributions from my very good friend Jacob Boblet. He just did his review for Black Bag, the Steven Soderbergh film. Highly recommend you go check out his review and all the posts on Cinnamon QSO. You can find the link in the description down below. You can also just go to your browser, type in cinnamonqso.substack.com. That's it for this week. Again, thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please like this video. It really, really helps with engagement, the algorithm, and people finding the channel. So if you have on the channel, why not subscribe? You know, we're trying to grow this community as best we can, so that, you know, one day I can maybe be as successful and wealthy as Scott Rudin. When I worked there, a lot of people said he and I looked alike, and sometimes I would impersonate him in the way he walks, and people would get a chuckle. Until next time, peace out.